Is it just the two?
Now I'm not. And welcome to everybody. This is obviously Clint, and I'm doing hosting for Fran. I'm hosting for Fran, and I had a little bit of trouble with the Zoom. I actually practiced twice. And can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. I will change the view because I can't see. I actually practiced twice on the Zoom and I thought I had it figured out. And as is the case with this technology, it decided not to work this morning. So Fran, luckily for us, Fran's plans got canceled. And so she is with us, even though we decided that we would go ahead with our Larry and my plan to lead the meditation because we had already gotten started and we figured that Fran could use a well-deserved break and a chance to sit on the other side of the meditation table, whatever that called.
Machitza.
There you go. So I'm a little more discombobulated than I plan to be at the moment, but I will take a deep breath and then we'll get started. Larry and I are gonna do it sort of a tag team this morning. He is going to give an overview of this week in the counting of the Omar. And after he does that, I will give some short personal observations of mine from my reading about that, and also from Larry's, what Larry's going to say, which I read earlier. I will introduce the meditation. It'll be a quiet meditation with a theme which you can use or not. And then at the very end, I will have a short reading, and then we'll have our lovely conversation, which I always enjoy. So with that brief introduction, I will turn it over to Larry.
Good morning. So the practice we're doing in this lead up to the holiday of Shavuot is one I've been thinking about in one way or another for years. As Fran explained last week, we're talking about the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. For each of these weeks, we focus on what I want to call a spiritual quality of well-being. Most of the time, folks talk about these qualities in isolation. That's worked for me up until now. What's really helping me this year is the progression from one quality to another, which Art Green talks about. I want to view these qualities in context. I think there's a delicious dynamism between these 7 qualities, which I want to talk about a little this morning. To introduce this idea, I'm going to talk today about the interaction of last week's quality, Chesed, with this week's quality, Gevurah, with a nod to next week's Tiferet. I also wrote out my thoughts about how all 7 qualities work together, and Clint and I will share that with you after the session. Clint convinced me that the entire scheme was a bit complicated for the time allotted this morning. So let's talk about the first 3. Last week's quality was love. The Hebrew is chesed, which has a much deeper connotation than the hallmark sense of love. Fran has been talking about her sense of chesed since we began meeting, and I'm so glad she has. Let's scroll down. The Hebrew of this week's quality is Gevurah. Gevurah has to do with limits and boundaries. It has to do with strength that's felt palpably. It has to do with clarity that can be articulated and understood. It's about being explicit more than implicit, direct more than indirect. It's a journalist's voice more than an academic's voice. I think it's also about being practical and utilitarian, a just do it mentality. I do want to suggest that it's, and this is my thing, I do want to suggest that it's also something you can feel in your body in sensual terms, not something that gets expressed using poetry or metaphor. So Gevura has to do with explicit strength, boundaries, articulated clarity, and then concern for self and protection against anything that might compromise one's sense of self-integrity. Gevura is not about positive connection. That's chesed. However, these two qualities become integrated through the third quality, tiferet, or well-being, which also connotes a sense of balance. We'll do that next week. Tiferet integrates these two very dynamic qualities of chesed and gevura. In this integration, we get it right. We hold both chesed and gevura at the same time. We need them both. And with this third quality, we display appropriate emotional intelligence. In my mind, and I think Art Green's mind, there is a level of instability inherent in this balancing of chesed and gevura. Life is essentially dynamic. The interplay between chesed and gevura provides an exquisite energy that drives us and keeps us from being static. Balancing chesed and gevura is hard work and at times frustrating. In those moments when we feel we've finally gotten it, we might become a bit smug and, Lord knows, triumphant. We may feel we've arrived. But I feel there's a level at which we never win in that triumphalist way and have never arrived in any ultimate sense. You could say we're not God. So speaking of God, I do want to, and Clinton, I thought it would be good to skip over to the last quality for just to give to open up some thirst. So speaking of God, I do want to put in a plug for the seventh quality we study in the last week of the Omer, Malchut or Shekhinah. While the first six qualities involve aspects of our hearts, our inner qualities, this last quality, the seventh one, is external. The Hebrew word Shekhinah has been understood as God's presence here in this very real world. Malchut, the other name for this quality, is the Hebrew word for kingdom. The resistance or materiality of real life is felt here as is a kind of presence that can't be only about ourselves. I think it's what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing. Interbeing is the palpable connecting thread between all of us, as well as the palpable connecting thread we might have with the larger physical world. For me, that means that there is a connecting thread throughout it all. Life is not a random assemblage. There is a deeper meaning that connects it all. This final quality of well-being for me is a grounding touchstone. So with a somewhat esoteric background in mind, I turn it over to Clint for some personal reflections to lead us into a meditation on Gevura.
Thanks so much, Larry. Now that you have Larry's well-researched explanation of Gevura and its place in the Kabbalistic universe, here are the personal insights that came up to me as I read about Gevura, getting ready for this morning. Okay, let's be honest. Gevura is a bummer. Discipline, limits, boundaries, not a recipe for a good time. Definitely not obvious fodder for an expansive meditation session. However, as usual, the situation is more complicated than my first impression. As I age, I've realized that the most important aspects of my life are not those that are the most freewheeling and fun. While I love a spontaneous road trip or a big celebration, what really has given me the most pleasure over the years are the more constant elements. My marriage, my career, parenting, experiences that require discipline and the acceptance of many limitations. Of course, it's not all about Gevura. If parenting taught me anything, it was the uselessness of discipline and limits on their own. But without the Gevura boundaries, these experiences would not be possible. Who knew that I could warm up to Gevura? I can also see the value of Gevura in smaller life lessons. While the joy is not as great, I do get satisfaction from other experiences that require discipline, whether it's losing a few pounds or forgoing the drink that used to seem so necessary for my pleasure. Just this week, I've been mulling over a limitation that affects us all. The realization that COVID really is with us for the long haul. I've been so looking forward to ending the discipline of mask wearing. Now I realize that for me, certain circumstances will require that I keep a mask at the ready whenever I leave the house for the foreseeable future. However, as Larry explained, it's not the discipline and limitations themselves that bring satisfaction, but the way they make space for and nurture love and insight. The peace of mind I get from knowing that I'm acting to protect the vulnerable infants and elders in my family circle transforms the limitation. Gevura making space for Hesed. Now let's relax. Put your feet on the floor. Straighten up a bit and let your head point to the ceiling. Now, we could take 4 or 5 deep breaths to settle. So, my suggestion for the meditation today, if you'd like to focus on something specific, is that as you feel your body relaxing and begin to quiet your mind, notice your feelings of constriction, of limitation. These might be physical or emotional. For me, physical constriction is often a mirror of emotional constriction. Then, without trying to solve a problem, see if the light of Hesed is available to ease the constriction. So you can begin to come back to the room, take your time. I'm going to read a poem from Rabbi Yael Levy about Gevurah. We step out of the narrow place into the expanse. And soon comes the call for restraint. Gevurah insists on setting boundaries, on making distinctions, acknowledging limits. Gevurah declares all life is mystery and urges us to bow to all we will never know. Out of balance, Gevurah becomes harsh judgment, disparagement, fear. It inspires a grasping for control and a perspective that only sees separation. In balance, Gevurah is a gateway to discernment. The bearer of discipline, it makes way for sacred practice and helps us stand in the face of mystery with humility and strength. Gevurah urges prayer and action and encourages us to take the stance of a spiritual warrior who will abide in the face of uncertainty with dedication, determination, and love. And so ends our formal part of the session. Let me turn off the recording.